Hi, it's Dayna, and I'm here with your divination for the full moon in Sidereal Sagittarius. The 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide says, clearly seeing the contradiction between indoctrination and new information. Break down. If you can't hold it, let it hold you. Let it carry you. When you've done all that you know. Have I ever told y'all about the term mutable madness? Have y'all heard me say that before? Mutable madness is what we're in right now. The hallmark of mutable madness is your perception of what is true and what is untrue, your perception of what is fact and what is false is all turned upside down and inside out on itself. Mutable is what I call a task in Divination for Liberation Sidereal Astrology. And each of us in our birth charts have this unique distribution of tasks. Every sign, each of the 12 signs, is defined by one of three tasks. So this goes for our birth charts as well as what the sky looks like at any given moment in real time. And so right now in real time, the sky is very, very, very mutable. The task of mutable asks this question: how do I know what I know? Can you sit with that and meditate on that for a moment? How do you know what you know? Well, Divination for Liberation Sidereal Astrology has an answer for that. And there are, I would say, four distinct means of knowing that the four mutable signs tell us about. Right now, we are at a full moon in Sidereal Sagittarius, and that means that the sun is in Gemini and the moon is in Sagittarius. That happens every year. But this time, while the sun is in Gemini, and if you want to know more about Gemini, you should definitely listen to the last episode of the Divination for Liberation podcast, Planting Seeds of Curiosity to Understand. I talked about Gemini a lot in that podcast episode. But like I said, in addition to the sun being in Gemini, Jupiter is also in Gemini. And in addition to the moon being in Sagittarius, we also have Saturn in Pisces. So there are three of the four mutable signs occupied. Each of these signs is using their unique tool as a means to knowing. So Gemini uses the tool of the intellect, curiosity, language, words, right? Gemini knows what it knows because it read it in a book. It took a course. It got a degree or a certificate, or they heard it through the grapevine or on the radio or on TikTok or, through Chat GPT. There is this kind of blanket receptivity to knowledge for the purposes of storing the knowledge and having access to it, not necessarily to discern whether it's true or false or fact or fiction. Then we've got Sagittarius, where the moon is. And Sagittarius knows things because it imposes an existing pattern of belief onto the information that it hears, that it learns, that it gets from courses, that it sees on TikTok. There's an existing set of assumptions and pattern of belief. That's why I call Sagittarius the pattern maker, right? And so it makes a pattern based on an existing set of assumptions or belief systems. It's like your religion that you bring to something, or it is the totality of what your relationship experiences have repeatedly brought for you. That's a pattern that you can make of your new experiences or information. It can be your political indoctrination, right? It could be capitalism and its validity as a structure. So that's Sagittarius. Then we've got Pisces, where Saturn is. And at the same time as this full moon, Saturn is stationary retrograde in Pisces. I'm going to talk about that more in a moment. But Pisces is the pattern seeker. So rather than bringing an existing set of assumptions or belief systems to a set of experiences or information or even internal data that's coming from our bodies, Pisces is looking for the pattern. It is connecting the dots in new ways. It is revealing to us things that are not explicitly communicated with words. It's revealing to us truths that may not currently be known or acknowledged collectively or even to ourselves or in our relationships. The final mutable sign where there won't be anything occupied at the time of this full moon is Virgo. And Virgo uses the tool of the senses, that which can be felt with the hands in a tactile way, which can be measured or weighed, that which can be observed and quantified in color or shape or quality. Virgo takes things at face value. Each of these four mutable signs is answering the question, how do I know what I know? Some of us have these mutable signs occupied in our birth charts, and or we have Mercury and Jupiter, which are the planetary representatives of these signs, configured in these very specific ways, which might make us more prone to knowing things via the tool of one sign or another. So some of us may be more inclined to be skeptical and suspicious, like Pisces, and to not only be skeptical and suspicious of what other people are saying to us, but skeptical and suspicious of our own experiences, right? And we use that skepticism to say, hey, not everything is what it appears to be. That there might be a truth hidden in plain sight that is not being explicitly communicated to us. This particular one is really important as Saturn is stationary retrograde. So let's talk about that for a minute. Then we're going to get back to this full moon and tie it all together. So Saturn has been in Pisces since March 31st. Saturn has been in Pisces. Prior to March 31st, 2025, Saturn was last in Pisces, I want to say from 96 to 98 or 95 to 97, one of the two. I'll put the dates in the description. And I'll actually put the birth dates in the description as well so that you can know if you're having your Saturn return. Because some of you are having your first or your second Saturn return, and that's really important. So, and even if you aren't having your Saturn return, you are experiencing the Saturn return to that time period, right? So in 97, for example, when Saturn was in Pisces, I was graduating from high school or graduating from eighth grade and starting high school, right? So it's the Saturn return of that time period, which means that even though it's not my personal Saturn return, the themes, circumstances, and events of that time can be relevant to what's going on in my life right now and over the next 2.5 years while Saturn's in Pisces. Whew. Okay. So when Saturn entered Pisces, March 31st, 2025, I wrote about that in the 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide, and I said, connecting the dots that shape reality. This is about a baseline acceptance that reality is not only what something appears to be on the material plane at face value. Reality is not only what is spoken or written about it. Reality is not just in the history books. It's not only on the news. It is not only with words. Reality can be an emergent fact that we are recognizing in real time as we connect the dots between things that previously seemed separate and unrelated. With Saturn and Pisces, what are the things that up until this point we perceived to be separate and did not recognize a connection between that we're now connecting? This political moment is that. One of the things that I want to talk about in relation to Saturn's retrograde station, which just means it's going to appear to go backwards through the zodiac and revisit the first 7 degrees. It'll do that till late in the fall this year. And which means that we're revisiting events and circumstances of things that have occurred within the first 7 degrees of this Saturn and Pisces transit, right? But one of the things that's been on my mind to talk about at this full moon is this idea that there is something very protective in us as a society and in us as individuals that keeps us from changing what we believe and what we believe to be fact or true. There's something in us that clinches very tightly onto what we know and what we believe, and it's hard pressed to let it go. I don't think this is a bad thing. There is a certain rigidity, there is a certain sense of entitlement to hold on to what you know and believe to be true as a way to stabilize our sense of self, as a way to stabilize the way we perceive the world to work, the way to stabilize the sense we make of the things that are happening to us and around us. Because if we're too quick to relinquish those facts and those beliefs, we tend to be too suggestible. We tend to be too open to having our minds changed, right? If I say, you know, that is racism when you deny me a job, even though I'm qualified, right? Racism is a belief system, right? It's a belief system in that the people who perpetrate it believe in the inferiority of certain races. And it's a belief system in the sense that as a Black person, in order to survive racism, I have to, at baseline, acknowledge it exists, right? So if I say, hey, it's racist that you don't give me a job, and my belief system is not very solid and I'm too suggestible, somebody could just say, oh, well, we had a lot of applicants and it was just really competitive. And so I'm so sorry we weren't able to give you the job this time. But, come back and try again if you see something you like, right? Because that makes so much rational sense. Like, it wasn't racism. It just, right? Like, if I don't have that tight grip, I am very, what's the word? Prone to being talked out of my own experience. This is so important for somebody because there are some of us who are too easily talked out of our own experience, particularly when it comes to experiences of pain or harm. And it keeps us in these cycles of experiencing pain and harm because we don't have a solid grip on our version of events and our interpretation. Someone can come to us and talk us out of our experience with a good sequence of words, right? And I find this happening on a collective level very frequently. I mean, Candace Owens is, I'm going to tell you, that girl, hate her all you want. But also, she is so good at poking holes in other people's arguments. And she's not always wrong. Such an uncomfortable truth. Do I agree with her? No way, Jose. I think she's off her rocker. you know? But my point being, that on a collective level, she succeeds in convincing some Black people that racism doesn't exist. She succeeds in convincing some white women that the patriarchy isn't real. And the reason that she succeeds is because people are too suggestible. And so at this full moon, where we're seeing the contradiction between indoctrination and new information, it's standing at the midpoint between stuff that's new to us, stuff that we didn't know, stuff that's happening in real time as news and new information and occurrences. And then on the other end is these existing belief systems about the way the world works, whether that is politically and political power and who the Democrats are and who the Republicans are and who is deserving of your political capital. Right? How are you standing between these new occurrences where, Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing exactly what they're promised? Right? How are you standing in the midpoint between these two contradictions where you believe that there was something to safeguard you and protect you in these moments, and now you find yourself vulnerable? Now you find that it doesn't matter whether or not you have a passport or you were born here, and you are equally vulnerable to the violence of ICE stopping you on the street and putting you in prison with no recourse for you to get free and see your family again. How are you standing at that midpoint? How is this changing your fundamental day-to-day relationships to understand that the thing that you thought was true about the world is not true? Not only is it no longer true, it really never was. It's so hard for people to believe their own eyes. And I think that this is also a reason for the lack of urgency. The lack of urgency is really that, well, I'm still getting my check. I got a job. I got to pay my bills. I got to pay my rent. Like, yes, for sure. Right? But the idea that is some type of protection from what's going on in the world is erroneous. And how is it that people finally change that? Does the big, beautiful, ugly boo-boo bill have to pass? And do people have to feel the repercussions of their inaction in order for that belief system to change, in order for them to see the contradiction? What is it going to take? This is a question that we have all the time. What is it going to take to bring about the change that is so direly needed in this world? And I maintain, especially over the past few episodes of this podcast, really over the past year or so, when we've been in this ongoing eclipse series of changing our belief systems and reorganizing our personal and collective hierarchies of trust, that our belief systems have to change. There are fundamental assumptions and truths about America, about our identity as Americans, about the way that the world works. There are fundamental truths and assumptions that have to be upended in order for the change to happen. It's not logical in the sense that A action equals B outcome. You can't even consider A action as necessary. You can't even have the will to enact A action until you are willing to give up the belief system that is upholding the current status quo. Belief systems are upholding the current status quo. And it is those belief systems that are determining our actions or inactions in this case. But I want to go back to this point of there is something that keeps us from connecting the dots. There is something that keeps us from seeing the connections in a way that brings about liberation. We can't see the connections between the way that COVID was dealt with once we got to 2021 and Biden declared COVID over. We cannot see the connections between that and right now. There's a certain normalization of harm of certain populations. This idea that if I don't belong to said group, then it is not going to affect me. How long does it have to creep closer and closer to the intersections of identities that you are recognized as or identify with in order for you to be like, oops, I should have stopped it back then when they treated disabled people and the elderly disposable? Because now more and more of the population is disabled. Just saw a news article out of the UK. Of course, I'll post it in the descriptions, where they talked about what's up with all the new disability claims. And that's what I mean by like the inability to connect the dots and the implications for personal responsibility and change that come when we actually connect the dots. As if 2020 did not happen, as if a novel virus didn't rip through the entire global population between 2021 and 2022, permanently altering the immune landscape of the human species. Right? And you don't have to take my word for this. You were there. It happened. And there are 500,000 studies and research papers that are outlining exactly how COVID functions. And it wasn't novel really to begin with, because we did have SARS 1. And we knew that those people who survived SARS 1, 10 years on, still were suffering from post acute infection problems. We are 5 years into the pandemic, and that first wave of infections in 2020 and 2021, where there was no vaccine, those people are still suffering from the post acute symptoms of their infection: the brain fog, the heart palpitations, the continued loss of taste and smell, the insomnia, the post exercise fatigue, the crashing after walking up the stairs and not being able to get out of bed. Like, connect the dots, homies. Right? But even in our personal lives, the survival imperative to maintain a cohesive self image inside our own psyches and also in the minds of the people around us often prevents us from integrating new information into the belief systems about identity. I always say identity is a belief system. It is a set of stories and assumptions that you tell yourself and others, that you use to make sense of your own internal subjective experiences and also the way that you show up in the world. Identity is a belief system. And so when we talk about changing belief systems, when we talk about seeing clearly the contradiction between new information and indoctrination, we're talking about the indoctrination of belief systems, the indoctrination of what it means to be white, or your gender, or your ethnicity, or your religion, or your race, whatever it may be. Those are all indoctrinations too. They are all a set of assumptions that you carry with yourself. And in this moment, it's so imperative to recognize them as such, because these are the belief systems and the indoctrinations that are keeping us from recognizing that you in danger, girl. You in danger, girl. And the things that unify us, the things that are similar between us, are so much more important than the things that separate us. Lastly, I want to say this. As we are seeing clearly the contradictions between new information and indoctrination, I want you to take this down to the very personal level inside your day-to-day intimate relationships, right? Indoctrination does not have to be religious or political. It could be the message that you were given over and over again about your worth, about your value, about the emotional space you're entitled to take up, about your feelings, about what you're capable of. How are you developing an openness to new information that can upset long standing beliefs about those things? Let's pull some cards. right, we're back with the tarot, using these symbols to see what guidance, what wisdom, what insight will carry us through this particular lunar cycle as we are seeing clearly the contradictions between indoctrination and new information. We've got the Hermit card on the bottom. The card on the bottom is our context and reference point. The Hermit card is a solitary card. It is a card of reflection and introspection. It's also a card of perspective. It's a card of contemplation and pondering. There's a way that with the Hermit, we are far from external influence, that we're able to get some insight separate from influence from other people. We're able to experience ourselves and process it separate from other people's. But something that's coming up for me in this moment is this way that even when we are alone, other people are with us in the form of the assumptions and belief systems that we carry. The assumptions and belief systems that we carry are an aggregate of reinforced stories from all of the people in our lives and all of our experiences. And so I see the hermit in this moment inviting us to parse that out. One of the benefits of having multiple mutable signs occupied at once is that it gives us access to this possibility that there is more than one way to know. There is more than one input we can consider as we're forming conclusions and forming judgments, that we can question each of the inputs that we're getting in this way that can refine and can be discriminating and can be discerning and bring us to a truer truth. One of the things that I'll always say about trust is that self trust, particularly, is not about relying on ourselves to make the right decision all the time. Self trust is equally about the capacity to acknowledge our limitations in knowledge, the limitations in comprehension, right? It is about the discernment to know what faculty to rely upon at any given moment. Sometimes we need to rely on the wisdom and expertise of other people. Sometimes we need to stop asking our friends, and we need to stay off Google and Chat GPT, and we need to sit in solitude, maybe journal and process or pay attention to our dreams over the course of a week and really keep other people out of the process. Other times we need to stand our ground and say, nah, this is exactly what it is, and I'm not going to let you talk me out of it. Self-trust is about knowing that there are multiple means of arriving at an accurate conclusion, and your mind is not always the place where that's going to happen. So that's the hermit. We've got the page of pentacles and the nine of swords. Pages for me are map makers, particularly with the page of swords. We are counting, we are quantifying something, we are measuring it, we're observing to see how much there is. We are taking an accounting of something. There can be an accounting in a practical sense of money. There can be an accounting of time. There can be an accounting of how things transpired over a period of time, right? I think time and money are the two resources that are most, I would say, forefront when we're talking about the page of pentacles. And then we have the nine of swords. The Nine of Swords teaches us that there is a limit to our intellect. And I think that this is really powerful at this full moon, where even the planetary representative of Sagittarius, where the moon is Jupiter, and it is in Gemini with the sun. Some people call Jupiter in Gemini being Jupiter in the sign of its detriment, meaning that I prefer to think of it as Jupiter is trying to form conclusions with as little information as possible. Every time I go outside and see a stick, I don't want to have to reinvent the wheel and take in all of this data to try to figure out if it's a snake that's going to kill me, right? I need to have shortcuts, as it were, in order to form judgments, particularly about whether I'm safe or dangerous. Right. And these shortcuts are often an existing set of assumptions or belief systems. The challenge with Jupiter and Gemini is that Gemini, by nature, does not rely on existing knowledge as an accurate means of knowing. Gemini's whole job is to keep gathering information, right? Like Gemini is a journalist. I talked about it in the last episode of the podcast. Planting seeds of curiosity to understand that Gemini is the communal storehouse of knowledge, not necessarily the proselytizer of our beliefs, right? Gemini is storing and accumulating the knowledge. That's why people who have Gemini placements are often teachers, or they are journalists, or they're writers or speakers in some capacity. They can even be librarians because their job is to accumulate and store the knowledge. But the problem with Jupiter in Gemini is that there is no threshold of enough knowledge to satiate Jupiter's feeling that they have enough to be sure. And as it goes, the more information you get, the harder it is to come to a conclusion because inevitably you're going to get information that's conflicting and contradicting. This is why in the previous part of this podcast, I talked about the importance of being able to hold on to your belief systems and assumptions and your interpretation and versions of events. Because eventually you ask too many people or you give too many people input into your judgment forming process that you're going to have contradictions in information. It's just going to confuse you even more. So of course it's all about balance, but I think in this moment with this 9 of swords, I think it's this similar thing. I think I talked about it in I think that was the full moon in Scorpio, fiercely protecting with pride, I believe, where I talked about you have enough information. You have enough information. And this is enough information to know that you can let go of some old belief systems that are out of sync with your current reality and lived experience. You know enough to make that leap confidently towards a goal that you have. You don't need to take another course, right? This invitation of inviting people into your process of developing self worth and confidence towards a goal you have is a fine line. There are absolutely some professions where you need to go back to school and get that degree and do your practicum and your however many hours and take your license and your board, right? But then there are also some ways that now you don't have to do all of that, right? And as a matter of fact, I think in this particular moment where we are reorganizing our personal and collective hierarchies of trust, there is something to be said for staying outside of institutional spaces because institutional spaces have shown themselves to be too suggestible to external political threats, bullying, and pressure. I think that something about these cards and something about this moment at this full moon, as we are in a longer arc of time, reorganizing our personal and collective hierarchies of trust, as we are contending with the frequent hallucinations of Chat GPT and other large language models, this moment is reminding us that there is no replacement for the type of trust that comes from intimate relationship built over time. That's something that's quite disturbing to me about ChatGPT, that it completely divorces the process of forming judgments and the exchange of information from relationship. Relationship built over time through networks is how trust is built. You cannot bypass that with the internet. You cannot bypass that with ChatGPT. You cannot bypass that with any AI or large language model. And at the end of the day, the 9 of Swords is saying more information is not better. Because eventually we reach a limit in our capacity to synthesize that information into something meaningful. And eventually, it reinforces existing biases in the status quo. I'm sorry, Chat GPT ain't leading no revolution. It's not. It is anti-liberatory. It is anti-radical and anti-revolution. And hey, that's fine. Not every part of our life needs to be radical and revolutionary. It's not realistic. I get that. But it still needs to be said that there is a limit to more information being better. I put out this post on Blue Sky last week. It was after a conversation me and one of my girlfriends were having. And I said, on pitch correction technology and the exploitation of artists. In this essay, I will dot, 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 right? Because part of pitch correction software, I think there is a trend, right? That people like T-Pain have made into a real art form. But I think that there is something inherently exploitative about pitch correction because one of the ways that recording technology has changed is that in the early days of music recording, you were recording a performance, meaning that the recording was meant to allow people to hear a performance of something anytime in any place. So you go into the studio fully rehearsed, all of the arrangements worked out, all of the rehearsal happening. Why? Because you had a limited amount of tape and you had to pay the musicians, the string section, the orchestra, the background vocalist, the engineer, the producer. You had to pay those people for their time. And so when you went into the studio, right, then you had to pay for the time in the studio. When you went into the studio, you had to be ready. You had to be prepared because there were these inherent limitations, right? Now, you don't need other musicians. You don't even need to know how to sing. You don't need to have rehearsed before you show up to the studio to do your song. You can record measure by measure every little bit of the song. And like, hey, I think that that's a convenience as a, recording artist myself. It's definitely a convenience, especially in this time of COVID where I'm still not really trying to be around maskless people in enclosed places like that I can still work on music by myself, right? But the exploitation piece comes in that the level of work and labor that's required of artists is unsustainable and always has been. For someone to release an album every 2 years means that they spend 6 months to a year recording and then they go on tour. And then as soon as they come off of tour, they go back into the studio and record another album. And then after they record that album, now they have to go on the press junket and they've got to go on tour to promote the album. And then as soon as they finish that, they go back into the studio. What? Of course, folks like Alicia Keys' voice have, struggled to maintain their integrity over this time. Of course, folks like Whitney Houston, right? It's very rare that an artist maintains their vocal stamina and tone through the entirety of their career. You have rare folks like Stevie Wonder who still sounds great. Um, I heard, oh man, who was that? The guy from Tower of Power. And I love you. I heard him singing that song. I can't remember his name. He sounded good and he's old, but it's very rare. You got to stay off drugs. You got to stay off the alcohol. You got to rest. But most artists aren't given the time to rest. And so you're back in the studio with a subpar instrument, music that you don't really know because you're learning it as you're in the studio. Anyways, I digress. My whole point ties back to what I talked about at the new moon in Gemini a couple weeks ago, which was that technology's function is to replace relationship. And I want you to be really, really, really careful about how much you are allowing AI, large language models, and social media and the news media in general to replace strong networks of trust built over time. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Divination for Liberation podcast. I'm your host, Dayna Lynn Nuckolls, and I will see you in a couple of weeks at the new moon in Sidereal Cancer. In the meantime, hey, if you want to find out how this astrology is impacting you personally, I definitely suggest you go ahead and download the 2025 Sidereal Astrology Guide. It walks you through writing your own horoscope based on your unique birth chart, month by month, transit by transit, new moon to full moon to retrogrades and all of that stuff. And then every second Wednesday of the month, I host a study group for the guide where we go into detail about what the astrology of the month is going to bring. We go over all of the interpretations of transits and fill in the blanks. I connect it to longer term patterns of astrological activity and help you to apply it to your personal life and what it means for you. You can also ask me questions about the astrology of the month and your chart. That's every second Wednesday of the month. Our next one will be on, what is that? Let me look at the calendar here. It will be on Wednesday, July 9th at 6 p.m. Central on Zoom. I'll drop the link for registration in the description. If you are a member of the Div for Lib Podia who pays, the lowest tier is about $6 a month, this is included in your subscription. And if you are a paying member of the Divination for Liberation Podia, I thank you so much for your continued financial support that makes this podcast possible. And if you would like to be in that number, go ahead and subscribe at the level that fits within your budget if you're benefiting from what I have to bring here. In the meantime, we got a slow burn COVID wave building. I don't think it will be as bad as previous waves, but I'm already hearing reports and seeing friends and loved ones come down with that Rona. I don't want it to be you. So make sure you're masking in indoor spaces wherever ventilation is questionable. Even if you're outside in a crowded space, you want to be mindful of that. I've just got some new technology that I'm going to be sharing over on my Instagram. I already made one post about a new air purifier I purchased. Follow me on Instagram at People's Oracle so you can hear me talk about my new far UVC lamp, and I will have a discount code for you. It's a technology that has been growing over the past few years with the onset of the pandemic. I even know someone who has created a whole company around producing clean air events using this technology. He's thriving and he's keeping his family safe from COVID. And I want you to keep your family safe from COVID too. So make sure you're wearing those N95 masks. Let's ride this wave out without getting sick again. I know you can do it. I want it for you and for me. Y'all take care. Bye.